Morning, Mary. I'm at Wigton area.
Good morning, councillors. How are we?
This is purely a test I'm doing, so...
Tommy speak.
Is that louder for everybody?
Can everybody hear Mary okay?
Is that better? Everyone's louder. That's great. And can Mary keep talking?
Mary, can you keep talking, please, so we can hear you?
How terrible are you, Councillor Scobie? I can't hear you very well. It's very echoey.
He's asking, he was saying, are you asking if he was happy?
Of course not. I never do that. I know he's always terrible.
Right. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Good morning, councillors. That's just about 10 o'clock now, so I think we'll get kicked off. Welcome to this meeting of the Wigton Area Committee. Number one, the agenda is cedrant and apologies. And the Chair's approval of remote participation. Claire?
Okay, Chair, you've got 8 members present, 2 present via Teams, being Councillor Hagman and Councillor Surtees, and all other members present in the room.
Thanks, Claire. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll declare an interest in item 7 specifically, but it's referred to in item 6. So I'm involved with third sector organisation, and there's items within these items that I can't really be involved in. So I'll leave the meeting for those 2 items. That's item 6 and item 7.
Very good. Right. Katie, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, item 4, the Wigton Area Committee discretionary budget arrangements. I am a trustee of the Whithorn Trust. So if we are going to be discussing specifically allocations under the museums, I won't take part in that discussion. That being said, if we're looking at the general allocations and not specifics, I'm happy to remain within the meeting.
Thanks, Katie. Item 3, minute of previous meeting, 4th of March.
Yeah, similar, Chair, in declaration of interest. I'm involved in the Scottish Week that will be declaring an interest, but we're not discussing in detail this individual, and I feel it's appropriate that I stay.
Thank you. I'm also a trustee of the Whithorn Trust, so the same applies to me as to Councillor Hagman.
That's it? I'm a technophobic. Everybody agree in the minutes of the last meeting? Agreed. Item 4, okay, Claire? Wigton Area Committee discretionary budget arrangements 2020-21. Report by Community Planning and Engagement Manager and Interim Head of Democratic Services. Which is, who's reporting this? Who's speaking on it?
It's myself who's
Yourself,
speaking on this
Ingrid,
report, yeah.
Well, I'll just hand over to you then, Ingrid. You can.
So the details are in the report about...
Sorry, Ingrid, just before you start, can I say to any officer who's going to speak today, can we keep it brief? Just address the report in front of you. Members have read it.
So yeah, just in front of you is the report to the committee regarding the discretionary budget arrangements for 2021, and I'm happy to take any questions that any members may have.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Just a wee query with regard to 3.14. It states that third sector organisations have access to a variety of news sources and external sources of external funds. And specifically it mentions the region-wide Community Benefit Fund and the region-wide Coastal Benefit Fund. Now, the last time I looked at the internet with regard to these funds, they were both closed. They were not accepting applications. So you do not have access to funds if they are closed to applications.
Ingrid?
So there is a new Crown Estate Coastal Benefit Fund, that's the 150k, that is just opened and will close in October. That information has went out to community councils and local community groups within the last week. And as far as the the Community Benefit Fund, it's my understanding that that fund is available at this moment in time.
So obviously, Ingrid, the situation has improved
Yes.
in recent weeks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a point on page 14, 3.8. I notice that we have a value in there for COVID-19 renew and restart. I'm wondering whether that's really necessary or whether we can question that, because there are so many funds out there supporting different groups, and it's not a huge amount of money. It may be more beneficial to allocate it to one of the other groups for funding.
So we do know that there are some smaller groups in particular that haven't been able to access some of the other maybe Scottish Government monies, for instance, where a small pot of money like this might be quite useful, that groups could access it really quickly. It's up to members how they decide how they want that money to be allocated, but within the report we're talking about expressions of interest, so it would be that groups would approach us with an expression of interest, and then depending on how you see it, whether that would be delegated to officers as the rest of the monies within the report are, unless there's more than one application that comes in which case it comes back to members for a decision. That is up to members to decide.
Yeah. Sorry, I just feel that you know, there is so much available to many groups. You know, there can't be very many falls through the hoops at all here. And personally, I would like to see that money go into one or the other, perhaps sport or something like that.
Any other members have a...
Chair, I'm waiting to come in. If you can take me just now, please.
Sorry?
I'm waiting to come in. I put speak in the chat function. I don't know if that message has been passed on to you.
Yes, don't worry, Katie, you'll get in. On you go, Katie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ingrid, for the report in front of us. Obviously, this has been to full council, and full council made the decision to take it back to Wigton Area Committee, which I'm pleased to see. In terms of the allocations on page 19, festival and events. Now, clearly this is for 2021, so the current year that we're in, and a lot of organisations have had to cancel their events or their festivals. Now, I appreciate that there will maybe be overheads and other costs associated with having to cancel events, so therefore I'm not proposing that we don't allow any allocation. However, I'm just wondering, do we need to be specific with which festivals and events will be eligible for this allocation? I'm conscious, for example, that the Wigton Festival Company in the previous year received funding for a new venture. However, Wigton Festival Company, my understanding, has also received funding through Major Events Strategy. I'm also aware that, for example, the Wigtown Country Music Festival is not on there, and I'm also aware that there's the Traditional Music Festival for Newton Stewart is not on that list. So my proposal would be to keep the allocation of £5,000, but not be specific as to which organisations could apply for that. On a similar note, we've got sports, and there's no indication of where that money would would be allocated to. Now, in the past, we've given funding for Wigtonshire Sports Council, which I'm happy to do so. However, if we leave that blank, does that mean that individuals will be able to apply for that funding? And like David, I did have concerns about the COVID-19 Renew Restart allocation. However, if it is purely for a note of interest that will come back to our next committee, I'm happy to leave that in there. But I'd be interested to hear from other members regarding the festival and events and the sports issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Ingrid, do you want to come in?
Just to say that obviously what is listed here is what was discussed and proposed to be put forward at the member seminar, which was held back in June. Again, that it would be up for members to decide if they wanted to make any changes to that today.
Thanks. Rose?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the discussion that we're having. However, I did have a question as to why the sport section was left blank. I wonder if Ingrid could answer that. But on the other topics, I also appreciate what you're saying, David, but I do think that we have to be very careful not to leave people behind. There have been a number of small groups that haven't benefited from some of the other relief monies from the COVID recovery. And I do think we have to be very, very careful not to leave anybody behind. The other thing I just wanted to say is I've been approached by groups who are needing to book things for Christmas festivities now. So if we didn't give them monies for festivities and events, then they would not be able to book things which need to be booked far in advance. And they accept that they may have to cancel, and everybody accepts that this is an ever-changing situation. But I do think that we need to release monies so people can get on with planning. And I think also from a psychological point of view, community groups need to feel a sense that things are moving on and that they can get some things going for the community, and following guidelines, of course, regarding the virus. So, Ingrid, could you answer, please, why that's been left blank? Thank you.
Yep, sure. I think that's because at the discussion at the member seminar, there had been discussion about whether it was the Sports Council or sports in general. Again, it would be for members to decide today whether they wanted to allocate that to the Sports Council in particular, or whether they wanted to leave it open for sports in general.
Chair, can I just come back in on that very point?
Yep.
Thank you. I am not a board member, but I am an advisory member of the Wigtonshire Sports Council. So I would have to exclude myself from those discussions. But on a note of information, Wigtonshire Sports Council are unable to raise funds easily due to the fact that they're raising money to distribute to individuals and groups.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rose. Next then is Willie.
Yeah, Chair, we are in peculiar circumstances, because when we discussed it at the seminar, and it was not a decision-making body, but when we discussed this, we wanted to encourage people to come forward still to get that community spirit in what we were making available, because what we might find is that we've got a huge underspend in all of the sections that we've tried to identify as, again, trying to encourage some community activity, providing, it meets with all the standards of isolation, social distance and so forth and so on. So what we've got before us is what we agreed on last year. And then again, it's on the discussion as I've had with Ingrid, it's for groups to come forward with an expression of interest. Then we'll determine, or if we do delegate to officers, they will determine how the money is dispersed then. But I think it's on the basis of what we discussed at the seminar, it's to try and encourage, whereas perhaps a gala didn't go on in the summer, although some of the entertainment has gone on that I know of, at least one. And therefore I hope that it is retrospective to some of these organisations if they have provided that entertainment or some event during the COVID relaxation. So in that respect, I would hope we got a continual update on the funds and how they are being dispersed on that. Only last night, just touching on sport, I had an approach made, and we've got people out there who are suffering under COVID, perhaps no renew or restart, but they are suffering in terms of meeting fees and so forth, membership fees, and regards a number of other issues. So I think, yeah, that we've got it pitched right. I think our difficulty will be is dispersing of the funds, that we may have a surplus to carry forward. And I think we've got to try and get as much as Ross says. People are expecting this money. No, maybe not expecting it, but it would help them tremendously. So I think we should be trying to disperse of as much of this money as we possibly can to assist the communities in getting back to some sort of normality and feeling part of that. So I think we've got a report before us. There are organisations not listed here, but they will have the opportunity to express that interest, and then the funds will be dispersed under the headings.
Thanks, Willie. Ingrid, do you have any comment on that?
Just one thing that I have had confirmed is that obviously we have been going through this very peculiar period, and I have had it confirmed that they will be able to pay groups retrospectively where they have already had events, and that funding will obviously be up until March, and then there may be the potential for use of it past that, given the period of time when the allocations will be made.
Right, thanks. Well, I'll go to Katie, and then I'm going to go to the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the recommendations, we're noting 1, 2 and agreeing number 3 as our areas of priority. I would like to propose that we amend recommendation 2.4. The current recommendation is to consider the proposals in Appendix 2 and agree the allocations. What I would look to do is to consider and amend the proposals in Appendix 2. And that amendment would be, as I said previously, to remove the specific festivals under the festival and events and leave that open for individual festivals and events to put in their expressions of interest. Because I am aware that while members know a lot of what's going on within the whole of Wigtonshire, members may not have every single specific detail, and there are festivals and events on there that take place locally that aren't on that list. I would support the inclusion of Wigtonshire Sports Council, and as Councillor Scobie just said, one of the issues we have is the dispersal of this funding. Now, it would be not in the best interest of the public to be still sitting on this money, and with information from Councillor Surtees that the Sports Council, their role is to disperse funds. If that organisation can disperse funds on behalf of the council, I'd be happy to propose that we insert Wigtonshire Sports Council within there. So it'd be to amend the allocations in regards to the festival events to remove the specific festivals and leave it open for expressions of interest, and to add in the Wigtonshire Sports Council under sports.
Thanks, Katie. I see Jackie wants in. Jackie.
Yeah, it was just a very quick one, Chair, thanks. So under the COVID renew and restart, we're talking about, Willie touched upon dispersing the funds and the difficulty maybe doing it. How will individuals know that this discretionary budget is available?
So the money for the new restart would be available to groups and organisations. Those groups and organisations would need to be constituted groups who had governance arrangements in place.
Right, Member us. Can we move to... Sorry. I don't want your rushes.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just seeking clarification with regard to the Sports Council. Does the Sports Council make awards to clubs, or is it only to individuals?
Chair, could I answer that? Chair, could I answer that?
Yes, by all means.
Yes, Jim, it is for clubs and individuals, and they have to join the Sports Council. They have to become members, and then they are eligible to apply.
Thank you.
David?
Yeah, Chair, I think Councillor Hagman, that was a proposal that she put forward. I'd be happy to second that.
Thank you, Chair. It's to amend Appendix 2, removing the specific information about the festivals, so that it be open to individuals for expressions of interest, and to add in a reference to Wigtonshire Sports Council against the sports priority.
Any other amendments, Willie?
Not so much a counter amendment, just an addendum to that you know, and I referred to it in my speech, is that we get a continual update, so that if we are seeing anything that we can is maybe going to follow an underspend, we can via then and bring back to this committee. So, you know, a continual update to the area committee on what monies is being spent, so that we know we are getting it out there and people are getting advantage of it. So it's really just an addendum to the amendment to Appendix 2, in that we get that update, and if it's necessary to wire money across from some of the other headings, if that would be accepted.
Sorry, I'll say that again. Is everybody happy with the recommendations with the addendum and the amendment? Members? A quiet crowd.
Chair.
Jim?
I assume that means that the listed organisations for festivals and events is now deleted. Sorry, that was my reading, that money, £5,000 be set aside for festivals and events, and it is up to the organisations to apply. But that there should be no preferred list of organisations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That
Thank
certainly
you.
makes sense. Yep. So that said, somebody speak to me. Thank you. Now we have item 5, Wigton Area Committee Anti-Poverty Grant Funding 2020-21, report by Young People Services Manager, who I think is Wendy.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Good to see you all again, and I hope you're all well. Thank you for the introduction, Chair. So I'm presenting the report as Anti-Poverty Officer for our council, and to keep it very brief, we're just looking at the recommendations which are to consider the draft criteria in the appendix, which we went over at the seminar in June, and then to consider and agree the arrangements and the timeline for the allocation of the funding, with a view to coming back to the committee in November with the applications for elected members' consideration. So I'm happy to take any questions at all in relation to any element of the report and the appendix. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Wendy. Members? Questions for Wendy? Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Just a query about the percentage for allocation. Why is it higher than the 19.2% for the allocation of area committee discretionary grant?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McComb. Now, the allocation of the 25.25%, which is now the allocation for the Wigton Area Committee budget for anti-poverty funding, that was agreed at Communities Committee on the 11th of June 2019. We reviewed the percentage allocations for each of the 4 areas at that time using poverty data that was held with our internal services. So all of the allocations were amended at that time, and it actually resulted in an increase to the Wigtonshire area. So we're now at 25.25% instead of the former 19.2%. But it was agreed at Communities Committee on the 19th of June 2019, and that allocation would be in place for a few years before it would be reviewed again. I hope that helps.
So, can I come in, Chair, briefly?
Yeah, sure, Jim.
In effect, that is a recognition that there is a greater requirement in Wigtown area.
Yes, Councillor McComb. In terms of the poverty statistics and the allocation formula, it's increased from the last time the percentage calculations were done, which was quite some time ago.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Katie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Wendy, for this report. I mean, it's disappointing to know that Wigtonshire is at the, I don't want to say top of the scale, I'm going to say at the bottom of the scale in terms of poverty, because certainly I know at full council in July we were looking at all sorts of areas of deprivation and unemployment, etc. And certainly out of the top 4 towns identified, 3 of which were actually in Wigton. So it is welcome that we do have a greater allocation in terms of the anti-poverty funding. My question is similar to one that was asked in terms of the discretionary grant funding, and that is, will there be retrospective payments be able to be made with this fund? We've just had it confirmed that retrospective payments will be able to be made under the discretionary grant. Will that also apply to the anti-poverty grant?
Wendy?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hagman. It's not something that area committee grant funding have traditionally completed in the past, but if elected members wish to include that in the criteria, we would be happy to add that in. It's traditionally always been for projects which are going to be delivered in the future, starting from the point where the funding is allocated. So but certainly it's very much up to the elected members. If you wish to include that in the criteria, we could do that. It's not something that's been done before for area committee anti-poverty funding, if that helps.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, Chair, if I could just come back briefly, I think I would be very supportive of this. My rationale is we are behind in terms of getting this money out the door because of COVID. I'm not necessarily saying that that should be the same situation every year, but for this financial year, I would be supportive that if there's a specific organisation or application for the anti-poverty funding, that we should at least consider that. I'm not saying that it would be guaranteed, but I believe because of the dates, and certainly looking at that, the funding will not be going out until at least November 2020. So to ask an organisation for those very short months over the winter to use up the allocation, I think it would be pertinent to allow a backdated payment. But I'd be interested to hear what other members feel on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Willie Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, and I would support that. And Katie there referred to get it out the door as much as possible. There are a lot of people suffering poverty following COVID-19 and pre-COVID-19. There was a lot of people suffering poverty. That's why we've got food banks and cafes that provide for people, and I'm just pleased they're there. Perhaps not under the circumstances, but nevertheless they are there. I'm looking, Wendy, at 3.9 in terms of just what was said, getting this out the door. We've got today, then whatever we agree, then on the 4th of September we launch the application process and we give them a month to make application, being the closing date of the 4th of October. Then from the 4th of October, there's an assessment by scoring panels and a report coming back with recommendations in November. Is there any way we can accelerate that period between October in the scoring panel through to the November? And what's your advice and opinion on that one, just to try and get it out the door?
Thanks, Willie. Mandy?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Scobie. In relation, it's a very good question. The closing date for the applications is midnight on the 4th of October, you know, as detailed and as you've noted. Now, we're already on a very tight timeline to bring that back to the November meetings of the Wigton Area Committee and the other area committees, because we need to assess each of the applications and make sure they meet the criteria and they also have the correct governance, insurances, all the other documents, you know, in place. Traditionally, that would be about a 6 week to 8 week period that we would use to do that. But we've shortened it considerably because the closing date for applications and the assessment by the scoring panel really need to be done within 3 weeks so that we can have the draft reports ready to come to the committee for the deadlines for the November area committee meetings. There isn't scope to put in another area committee meeting earlier than that, because we wouldn't be able to have one sort of in October, because we wouldn't be able to physically have the work done after the closing date to fit in with an extra meeting. So I'm really sorry, we couldn't tighten it any more. And the November committee meeting is the next scheduled meeting, so we're fitting in with the schedule of the meetings. So I don't think we could expedite it any further, Councillor Scobie. Sorry.
Yeah, I accept that. I was just hoping we'd get it out following today. No, I'm only being flippant there. No, I accept the advice being given that they're working to a very tight time scale.
Right, we'll have the recommendations before us and I'm going to move to them. And recommendation 2.1, can we agree it, or does anybody want an amendment to it? Agreed. 2.2, agreed. Aye, thank
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Chair, just before I leave, can I ask if there's any urgent business at the end of this, or have we... Okay, thank you.
Item 6, Car Park North Street, Glenluce, proposed asset transfer. And I believe that Colin Freeman is going to speak to this. Right, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Members have in front of them a report, and they're asked to consider the business plan for the Old Luce Development Trust in concern of the car park in Glenluce, consider the options available to members at paragraph 3.22, and then agree their preferred option from those options at paragraph 3.22 to recommend to the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Members? Willie?
Yeah, Chair, I'm looking at 3.11, Colin, and 3.12. It isn't, well, particularly 3.12 is in the Trust's intention that the neighbours will be visited personally. Was this not the one where there was a contentious issue in previously, and I'm talking about going back years, with a piece of the ground and access to the individual's property via a caravan, and it does not appear in the report. Has that been resolved?
Chair, Councillor Scobie, previously property colleagues have been in contact with the resident, and the rights of access are reserved. They're still in place. I know from the business plan that the Old Luce Development Trust have put forward, they acknowledge those rights of access and will maintain those rights of access. And colleagues in property have confirmed that following today's meeting, they will undertake some work to actually formalise those rights of access so they can't be removed.
So it has been resolved then, this week? Yes.
Correct.
Any other members?
The map which we see on page 35, there is a triangular area indicated on that map. My recollection was that that was the area in dispute at the previous meeting. It's a great pity that the map appears in black and white, because it makes it extremely difficult to actually understand the significance of the boundary lines there. I take it there is no way we could get a coloured copy of that map.
Chair, I think Nick Lane from Properties may be on the line, who might be able to answer that question for members.
Good morning, members. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The area that is shown as a black triangle was an additional area that the neighbours wished to have rights over so that they could get their caravan in. The committee decision back in 1996 was not to give them that, but to give them the access right that follows the boundary wall, turns left and into their property. The request for that additional turning space is still extant, i.e. they would like it. I do not feel that at this, that this committee meeting was the appropriate time to add that to your decision on the car park for the community asset transfer. If you're so inclined, we can consider that now. That's a member decision, so up to you.
Yeah, thanks. Are we so inclined? Willie?
Yeah, Chair, that was the question I asked, and got the answer that it had been resolved. What we're seeing in 3.12 is that there would still be, the intention of the trust to get along to the neighbours. But if there is a dispute that it's extent, then we would still be, passing something over and leaving it to the two individuals to sort out. Is that not the case, Nick? And it becomes a civil matter then, whereas it's currently in our hands.
The only reason that the additional part I didn't include, or it wasn't included in the report you have before you today, was because it was in addition to the rights that had been given in 1996. My understanding is at the last meeting that I was at, the Development Trust were not keen to add to their burden, if you like, by increasing that area. The neighbour does not actually require that additional area to gain his property. The only issue is that when he's moving his caravan, he needs to swing into the car park. They're not asking for ownership of this area, it's just access rights over it.
Okay, members? Explain something to me, could you?
I was just advising that the report before you today is about a proposed community asset transfer, and members should be considering what's before them in the report. If there's another matter outstanding, then that's really another matter for another day.
Thanks for that, Claire.
Chair, I propose we go with option 1.
Chair, can I come in, please? I've been waiting to speak.
So have some others, Katie. I'll just check that. Anybody else? Jim, you want to come in?
Chair, I'm sorry to go back to the point I raised. There are 4 coloured lines on this map. How do we distinguish between the lines? Because the map is in black and white.
Jim. Now can I bring Katie in? Thank you for your patience, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. I am concerned that there's still questions over this, as raised by Councillor Scobie. I think as members we need to have 100% assurance that we've got all the up-to-date and best information before we agree to make our recommendations to the FPT committee. Clearly we've got option 1 and option 2. Now, my understanding is with community asset transfers, each community asset transfer has to be considered on its own merit. We cannot interlink them with any other transfer. However, I do note that in the paper on 3.14, there's a statement saying that the trustees have made the decision that they basically want to interconnect those 2 applications, which I assume is up to them if they wish to do so. But as elected members here today, we cannot interconnect these two applications. One of the questions I have, and I should also say that the Old Luce Community Trust, they have done a wealth of positive and fantastic projects within the area, and on 3.7 there's a whole list of all the different actions and projects that have taken forward, so they are to be congratulated on the huge amount of work that's been put in. However, I'm aware that when we have discussed community asset transfers across the council, there has been concern of whether the council is getting best value for money. Now, I will only talk about the Glenluce car park, which we're on just now, which is valued at £50,000. Obviously, the second one is valued at 200. So we're talking about £250,000 here. Now, the best value for council, are we ensuring that we're getting best value for council at £1? And the reason why I ask this is I'm aware that our policy was amended in December 2019, and I'll maybe ask officers to confirm this, but that policy stated that all groups should evidence that they have at least applied for external funds in order to make purchases. And I'm aware that certainly there's other community groups that have successfully applied to the Scottish Land Fund to make payment and to increase their offer to the council. So I guess my question has to be, there doesn't appear to be in this paper before us any evidence that the CAT transfer has followed this policy, and are we able to go back to the group to ask them and ask them formally to actually put forward any applications, for example, to the Scottish Land Fund, who have money available for community groups to make community asset transfers? Is there no possibility, is there a third option available, or can we agree one option with a proviso or with an amendment to say, can you please, before it comes towards the next committee, make an application. I'd seek advice really from the officers on that one, but I'm really conscious that we do need to get best value for the council, but equally we need to support our organisations locally as well, because they have done a wealth of fantastic work locally. So yeah, if I could get some advice from the officers, that would be useful. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Katie. Any other members? Well,
yeah, just, is there a time scale for these asset transfers in terms of the legislation?
Chair, Councillor Scobie, I'll answer your question first and then maybe go back to Councillor Hagman as well. Yes, there is a time scale. Once the asset transfer application has been validated, then we have, by legislation, 6 months to bring that to the point of decision. The Old Luce Development Trust application for the car park was validated in February. Due to COVID and the lockdown, we negotiated an extension to that. However, that extension is coming to an end very, very quickly, and this, without the approval of a further extension with the Trust, we would need to get this to the next Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. And Chair, if I can go back to Councillor Hagman's questions. When we got the business plan and stage 2 application from the Trust, we recognised that within that they explicitly say that they will have access to significant levels of wind farm money over the next 25 years. Because of that, we went back to the Trust and asked them to consider improving their financial offer for the transfer. They didn't want to improve their offer, and it's within their right to offer what they think is reasonable. Councillor Hagman is correct. In December of last year, we updated our community asset transfer procedure, and we were explicit in that, where we asked community groups to evidence that they have researched and hopefully sourced external funding to support or reduce the level of discount that they're requesting. It's not clear from their application or from their business plan whether they have done that. The Scottish Land Fund that Councillor Hagman refers to is my understanding that is just about to close, so that's not open to the group. However, the final question from Councillor Hagman in terms of is there the potential for a third option, it's within members' gift to propose a third option, and that could be that members agree to recommend to FPD subject to an improved financial offer from the Old Luce Development Trust.
Thanks, Colin. Could I have Ross? Then I'm going to move to the recommendation.
I think Andrew was before me, Chair.
I apologise, Councillor. Andrew? You've been in? No?
Is it me then?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to support some of the councillors, Willie and Katie's points, that there's and Jim as well, that there still seems to be quite a few questions about this application. In view of the crisis that we've been in and the delay in everything, and to give the group a chance to maybe look at the concerns that we have and the fact that we may be at risk of going against our own policy, could there be an option to delay it? I know that, Colin, you said it has to come to the committee, but in view of the crisis, is it possible to ask questions of the group?
Colin?
Chair, thank you. Councillor Ortiz, by law, we need to get this community asset transfer application to the point of decision by the end of September, early October. The only way we could extend that is to for the group to propose an extension that we agree to. If they don't propose an extension, then I think we, by our own procedure and by legislation, we need to get this to the point of decision as soon as possible.
Can I just say, Chair, I certainly don't want to put this group at risk, because I can see the huge asset that this and the huge amount of work that this group have done. So I certainly wouldn't want to be in the position of putting them at risk. But I do acknowledge the questions that we have.
Does Councillor Justin want to come in now?
Yes, please, Chair. One of the issues that's been discussed here is the amendments to council policy, the asset transfer policy last year. Initially, this group put an application in 2 years ago, did they not? That we declined or we sent back. So I'm wondering, has this just been a process following on from their previous application? And would they have been enticed in any, or would they have been asked in any sense about or notified about this policy update?
Chair, Councillor Auguste, you're correct that this has been a very long process over a couple of years. However, the validated application or the validation to the application was only made in February, so the group would have been knowledgeable of the improvements and the updates to our policy, and I know that the ward officer has worked very closely with the group to make sure that they're fully appraised of everything that they needed to know.
Also, Chair, I heard earlier on that there's been issues with the turning circle for the caravan since 1998, and I imagine if it's not been resolved by now, I think the only way to resolve it would be to sell that piece of land, or to, because at the moment, as a car park, I could go and park my car there for 20 weeks, and that would remove their access to that, so that they don't actually have the rights under us. Am I correct? To that piece of car park, but the deal that we are offering here, the rights will be built into that for that access, that turning access.
Chair, I think you're correct, Councillor Auguste, but I'll stand corrected by Nick Lane if he's still there.
Yep. Councillors, that would in fact be the case. We can protect the increase in turning requirements at any stage in this process, as long as when we go to register those access rights, we include that additional area that they need for turning the caravan. I can just restate that the original access that they were granted was purely for vehicular access. There was no mention of a caravan. And they're able to access their property without that extra space at the minute. It's only when they have a caravan on the car that they can't swing round enough.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
You want to come back, Colin? No.
Yeah, I hear what Nick's saying, and yeah, that access is there for the vehicular access. But in any of the discussion we've had at council, at area committee that I've been part of, then it's always been recognised there is a caravan and the person was requiring that turning area. So just on your last remark, Nick, then I would hope that on asset transfer to validate it, that we make that a condition. So that, you know, we are transferring the asset and recognising that there are community issues, so we're being fair to both sides, it would be my opinion.
I don't know. Oh, Katie? Colin, Katie?
Morning, Chair. Thank you. So if we're looking at the recommendations, Chair, we do have to agree a preferred option on there. I would look to propose a third option on there. Now, I don't have the exact form of words, and I would look to council officers to assist with that. However, I believe that we should agree to the recommendation to transfer the property. However, I would look to include with evidence that external funding has at least been explored because that is missing from there. And I think under Finance and Procurement Committee, they will be looking for that information. So I believe that, you know, if we can make recommendation for the transfer with the additional evidence added in, and also with the additional written assurance that any requirements within the community or the neighbours' access issues are resolved, and that would maybe perhaps go to get some assurances that Councillor Scobie has just raised there. So is it possible, and as I say, I would look to the council officers for a form of wording that we agree to this transfer with those two issues highlighted, or as conditions of the transfer.
Thanks, Kay. Andrew?
Chair, I would move that we go with option 1. I believe that this car park situation has gone on for quite a while. It's a burden to the council. The worth of 50,000, yep, it's got a value of 50,000, but do we have anyone else offering us anything for it? Oh, sir.
Are you seconding, Andrew?
Chair, no one is offering us £50,000. What is being offered is £1. A £50,000 asset transferred for £1.
Chair, I would call it a £50,000 burden, as we have to maintain that car park currently. And if we can remove this from our assets and fix this issue with the turning circle for the residents, I think we've got a win-win situation. And the amount of officer time that's been spent on this car park, I think we're probably we're in excess of £50,000.
Thanks, Andrew. Right, we'll move into the recommendations. We'll have an amendment from Andrew. Is it an amendment that we accept option 1?
Chair, if I may, my original proposal to look at an option 3 of yes, let's transfer it, but let's get that additional information before it goes to, or with the application as when it is presented to the FPT committee. So my proposal of option 3 still stands, but certainly if Andrew wants to put in a counter amendment to that,
thanks,
that's clearly up to himself.
Right, Claire, could you just clarify for me what the actual recommendations, proposals, amendments are?
Okay, at the moment I've got a proposal for a motion from Councillor Hagman for that there be an option 3, which would recommend the transfer to FPT with additional information included about evidence of external funding being explored and to resolve the access issues with the neighbours. At the moment I haven't got a seconder for the motion. I can see that Councillor Surtees wants to speak, Chair.
I'll second Katie Hagman's idea, thank you. Option 3.
Right, that's okay. Second up.
Thank you. And I've got an amendment proposed by Councillor Giusti for option 1, which currently doesn't have a seconder.
Yeah, Chair, if Councillor Giusti accepts that access rights be protected with the turning area included for the caravan.
Absolutely.
Chair, how do we protect access rights if we have transferred the land?
Good question.
You'd be transferring
I could answer that, Chair.
If you just let the member come in first, Nick.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I added as an inclusion that the transfer has this as a condition. Maybe Nick has got something else to say.
Nick?
Yep, the access right would be protected in the neighbour's title deeds. He would have a legal right that would prevent anyone else from interfering with that right. It puts the responsibility onto the neighbour, if you like.
Thanks for that. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Does that include the turning circle for a trailer or caravan?
Nick?
If that was the member's decision, yes, we would include that.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, can we be clear on who's seconding Councillor Justy's amendment?
Happy to second the amendment with that. Access rights to be protected with the turning area included for the caravan.
Chair, I'm having trouble hearing Claire.
I'm having trouble with the whole system.
Okay, can you hear me now, Councillor Surtees?
Yes, thank you, Claire. That's fine.
Right. Now tell us where we are.
Okay, right, we've got a motion proposed by Councillor Hagman, seconded by Councillor Surtees. That would be in option 3, which is essentially to recommend the transfer with the additional information that would ask for evidence of external funding being explored, and also to resolve the access issues with the neighbours. You have an amendment proposed by Councillor Justy, seconded by Councillor Scobie, that would be option 1, amended to include that the access rights be protected for the neighbour, including the caravan.
Right.
Okay, going to the vote then. Chair?
Sorry?
Going to the vote? You want to go to the vote?
Just move to the vote.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
What, motion or amendment, Chair?
Amendment.
Vice Chair?
Motion, please.
Councillor Justy?
Amendment.
Councillor McCammon?
Amendment.
Councillor McComb?
Amendment.
Councillor Scobie?
Amendment.
Councillor Surtees?
Motion, please.
Amendment is carried, 5 votes to 2. Thank you.
Move on to item 7. I think. Which is item 7, which is the Woodside Industrial Estate Glenluce proposed asset transfer. I thought we'd done that one. Claire? It's you. Colin. You're back on again.
Thank you, Chair. Members in front of them a report covering the proposed asset transfer of Woodside Industrial Estates in Glenluce to the Old Luce Development Trust. Members are asked to consider the Old Luce Development Trust business plan at Appendix 2, consider the options available to the Council as detailed at paragraph 322, and then finally agree the preferred option from those listed at paragraph 322 and make this recommendation to the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. Chair.
Thanks, Colin. Any members? Nobody want to speak?
You've got Councillor Hagman wanting to speak.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Hagman?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've got similar concerns in regards to this asset transfer as well, although instead of looking at £50,000, we're looking at £200,000 that we've been offered £1 for. I'm also aware that we do receive an annual income, if I'm correct, on this property, so we would be losing £20,000 a year in terms of income coming into the council. So again, I'm left with the question, is it best value for the council to transfer an asset of £200,000 with an annual income of £20,000 for £1? And Again, I don't wish to take away the extraordinary work that has taken place within the community. Again, I don't see any evidence that there has at least been an application or an attempt to apply for funding to offer a better offer than £1. So I guess I've got a similar concerns as to the last one. And again, I would just ask the officers, was there any discussion in increasing the offer in terms of this asset transfer? If I could ask that question first, and I may come back if possible, Chair.
Thanks, Gary. Colin.
Chair, thank you. Similar to the previous asset transfer request, when we received this application and the business plan, we again recognised that there was a significant discount being requested and that the Old Luce Development Trust had significant levels of wind farm money available to them. So we went back to the Trust and asked them if they wanted to improve their financial offer, and they did not.
Thanks, Colin. Andrew, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I actually understand and I agree with Katie's caution here, as there is a £19,000 a year income. Considering the value of the estate, is there any work that needs to be done to this estate? Do we know what the condition of the property is like?
Chair, Councillor Gusty. The estate and the units are a going concern. They're all occupied at the moment, hence the annual rental. I think Nick would be better placed to talk about the maintenance of the asset. Nick?
Yep, the two tenants that are in there just now, they have a full repairing and insuring responsibility. So any maintenance responsibility lies with those two companies. They've been very good tenants over the years. Turf Valley have been in occupation for at least 10 or 15 years, I think. And as I say, it's the responsibility for repair lies with the tenant. Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other members?
Sorry, Chair. Can I ask, when was the rental value last assessed and when was the rent last changed for the tenants?
We had a rent review in... Actually, it was their lease for Turf Valley. Their lease expired in 2017, if I remember rightly. And at that point, we decided that there was no opportunity to increase their rent. And they were, let's say, trying to negotiate a rent reduction. So rather than give them a new lease, we allow the lease to continue on what's called tacit relocation. So the lease continues yearly on the same terms and conditions. So it was a way of avoiding having to consider their request for rent reduction while still maintaining our level of income. The other unit is Gallery Art Marketing. Their rent was last looked at, I think it would be 1 year ago, and they have another 2 years left on their lease to run. So I would, in my opinion, the rents are current at the minute. There is, given the current commercial climate, there's not that much room for an increase in rent. But of course, we try every year when we can. Okay.
Thank you. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Are we as a councillor in a position to make any investment into this property?
I can answer that. There is currently a scoping project being done for renovation of some of our industrial units using government money. I have a meeting next week to discuss that with some of my economic development colleagues. This would be a project going forward in the next financial year if we're successful with our funding bid.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, maybe the follow-on question to Jim asking that is, you know, how much liability is hanging over the head of this property? Because I'm looking at 3.13, where, you know, the trust in this instance has secured a sum of over £100,000 being made available for the purposes of repair, rewiring, fire detection systems, etc. So, you know, notwithstanding that we have a sitting tenant who has got liability over the property, how much would you estimate, or is it possible to give an answer of what liability would be should these two tacit agreed, you know, tenants decide we're going to move away?
In the commercial world, there's always the risk that companies will move on. But given the commitment that Tarf Valley in particular have given to Glenluce, and they have, you know, never indicated that they're anxious to leave that location, I think it works very well for them. There is always the risk that one day they may up and go, like you say, and we would then have Tarf Valley occupy basically 3 units, but as one. We would then have 3 units to relet. Now, although inquiries for the units at Glenluce are few and far between, I would consider it likely that we would be able to get new tenants if our current ones, you know, decided to throw the towel in. So there's always a risk in the commercial world, but there's always demand for commercial buildings, provided the rent is at the right level. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Nick actually answered that question in terms of liability should the two decide not to take up the tacit arrangements and then relocate. What liability is it? You know, has it been assessed? But you know, I know that's a difficult question. But in terms of the asset transfer, is it a consideration the asset transfer would be with the sitting tenant? And then the trust would then inherit that rent on the properties.
That is my understanding. The reason they wish to acquire these units is to secure a steady income stream for their development trust.
In that respect here, then, maybe there's some validity in the previous, that's different to the previous transfer in what Katie has said, whether, you know, we may seek better value for the property.
Right, thanks, Ollie. Thanks, Mums. Is there any other member? I know Katie wants to come in, but just before I bring Katie in, is there any other members that haven't spoke that wish to speak? Right, go ahead, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So, unfortunately, with these reports, nothing is ever just quite so simple. I'm looking at the criteria for the disposal at best consideration. So we have to appraise and compare the costs and other disbenefits and benefits of the proposal. Well, looking at the benefits, we have got down here listed as a benefit that it will safeguard local employment. Now, I'm not sure how valid that is, because there's no proposal from the council that will suddenly shut those units and those units will be taken off. So I'm not 100% sure why that comes under the benefits. And again, it's got down here that the trust acquires further assets in the village. Yes, that might be a benefit, but it also could be a burden to the trust. So it could be seen as a benefit and disbenefit. There is mention in here that the benefits are that there is access to borderlands and South of Scotland Partnership funding, and that the access to the trust's own funding mechanism. So again, this goes back to my previous questions. It may not be possible to get external funding to support the purchase of this asset. However, I would be really keen to see evidence that there has at least been a application for or exploring that possibility. So while I accept that there may not be any funding out there to support it, I would like to see the evidence that it is at least been explored. Under the disadvantage, it actually states on here that there's a lack of community support and apathy. And I'm just wondering if the officer could maybe ask, well, what evidence is there of that lack of community support? Because obviously, if there is lack of community support, it's not going to be in the interest of even the local community. So I'm just really conscious that we have got these bullet points and that we have to be satisfied that the disposal for the consideration is reasonable and that it's likely to contribute to any of the purposes laid out in development and regeneration. So I do have questions about it, and certainly in terms of the disadvantages, what evidence is there that there's lack of community support for that one?
Thanks, Katie. Right, member. You say something you want to say, Andrew?
Sorry, Chair, I thought Katie had questions there to be answered. I was hoping to go on the back of it after the questions were answered.
Somebody clarify.
I did have some questions, Chair. If officers could answer that, that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Hagman's question about the disadvantages, when we detail the advantages and disadvantages of the proposal, we try and extract as much information from the Community Transfer Body's business plan. Within the business plan, the Trust detailed a SWOT analysis and did identify that if there was a lack of community support or apathy, then that would put at risk any of the proposals. So that's direct from their business plan.
Thanks, Colin. It seems to be a straightforward question in the recommendations, options 1 or option 2. And I think and that's what the whole recommendation is. Do you want to go for option 1 or option 2? Anybody have any feelings? Andrew? Jim?
Chair, I believe Colin suggested a third option, which was to recommend an improved financial offer, to recommend to finance procurement and transformation. Is that correct, Colin?
Chair, thank you, Councillor McComb. It's within the gift of members to propose a third option, and that option could be to recommend to agree the transfer subject to an improved financial offer from the Trust.
Right, members. Anybody else?
I can't hear anything.
Sorry, who was that?
Sorry, I couldn't hear anything there for a minute, Chair.
The committee was just looking at a third option.
Yeah. Thank you.
There doesn't seem to be any support for it within the committee.
Well, I couldn't hear that proposal. Sorry.
Can I repeat the proposal?
Yes, please.
And that is to recommend we proceed with the transfer on the basis of an improved financial offer coming forward from the Trust.
I would support that motion. Second it.
Right, we have
Thank you.
a third option being put forward and seconded. Can we take a vote on that first of all, Claire?
Okay, I've only got one proposal being in front of me, which would be there'd be an option 3, which would be to agree to recommend the transfer subject to improved financial offer coming forward from the Trust. There's support from that from Councillor McComb and Councillor Surtees, and you've also got Councillor Hagman wanting to speak as well, Chair. Councillor Hagman, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Both Councillor Surtees and I had actually requested to speak prior to Jim moving option 3, but I think the committee's moved on now, so it's fine. I'll just happily carry on. Thank you.
Okay, move to the vote.
Okay, there's only one motion. Haven't heard anything alternative. Is there a seconder for option 1?
I'll second you just to the vote, Chair.
Okay, then I've got a motion proposed by Councillor McComb, seconded by Councillor Surtees, being option 3, which is basically to agree to recommend the transfer subject to an improved financial offer coming forward from the Trust, and the amendment proposed by yourself, Chair, seconded by Councillor Scobie, to go with option 1 as in the papers.
Thanks,
so going to the vote then, Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman.
Motion, please.
Councillor Giusti.
Amendment.
Councillor McCammon.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor Scobie.
Amendment.
And Councillor Surtees.
Motion.
Okay. Amendments carried 4 votes to 3.
Thank you, Claire. I'm not going through all that again. We have no other business, so thank you for your attendance.